Hi, and welcome to Unplanned, the show about cities and how they work. I'm Sam, your host. I want to remind you to subscribe to Unplanned for all the great shows we're going to have coming up. But without further ado, I want to introduce today's guest, a very important person here in Cambridge who has decided that now is a great time to figure out the next phase of her life. She is the head of Cambridge Community Television. I am speaking about none other, of course, than Susan Fleischmann. Susan, welcome to Unplanned.
Thank you, Sam. You're very kind.
So, Susan, it's great to have you on the show. And I guess you are about to start on the next phase of what you're up to, and I wanted to get your sense, maybe to start with, about that transition that you've got in front of you. Why now, and what are you thinking about as we go forward?
Well, that's a really good question. Why now it's not because of the pandemic. I just want to say that. I've been thinking about this for a while. I think it's time for some new leadership and new energy at CCTV. I've been there for over 30 years. I've been the executive director for about 28 years. And originally I was a freelance photographer. So I've been wanting desperately to get back to doing photography and also just going back and looking through my work from the 70s and 80s, because it was a kind of a historical time here in the Boston area, especially regarding women's rights and LGBTQ rights. So I have a lot of things I want to go through and document. You know, we were shooting on film, 35 millimeter film back then, so I have to do a lot of scanning and just organizing of my photos. So that's just been a dream for a while. As we start looking at that, that's a historic period, so I need to get back to that.
And what prompted that? We'll get into all this stuff, but what prompted that? Did you just start leafing through photos and you thought, well, now is a good time in my life to just go back and look through all this stuff and maybe pick up a camera again?
No, it's been like this for a long time. I was trained as a photographer, and it was a really important part of my life. And in some ways, that's how I got into community media. It was sort of a natural flow to go from documenting important social movements of the 70s and 80s to thinking about the moving image and video. It was not only because of the media aspect of it, but also because of the social justice aspect of making sure that everyone had access to the tools to be able to do what I was doing, which was telling a story about my life and the lives of people around me who I cared about.
That's amazing. Now let's go back to CCTV. So you say it's 30 years or about 30 years, is that right?
It's 32 years.
Since you started.
Yeah.
What was your first job at CCTV?
I was the access coordinator, so I was the second person hired. I was under executive director Erwin Hipsman, who was the founding executive director, and he was there for 5 years, and then I took over when he left.
So take us back to that moment. What years are we talking about? What time?
It was 1988, pre-internet in a lot of ways. You know, I mean, we actually have a video of Al Gore speaking at Thinking Machines in Kendall Square about the internet. And so it was all starting to happen then. We were in One Kendall Square, which was a wasteland at the time.
Yeah. And what was the impetus for CCTV? It itself started in 1988. You're going to give us all a little history lesson here, because this is not actually stuff I know much about at all.
Let's go back.
Let's go back. Go in the Wayback Machine. We'll go back in the history.
So in the early 70s, there was a pretty progressive Federal Communications Commission, and they determined that cable companies, which were essentially forming monopolies in various communities and also using the public rights of way to make their money, digging up the streets and the sidewalks to lay their cable, to bring cable television into people's homes, that it was determined that they should give something back to the community. And that something back was, at that time, community cable television channels, which of course nobody had cell phones and your your Panasonic Lumix or whatever. You know, people didn't have that kind of technology. So then it was, you know, in a lot of ways, what we saw in the early 70s was community bulletin boards on those channels, just making public announcements. So some activists got a hold of this concept and thought, wait a minute, these are really people's channels, right? And the FCC said, well, not only do you have to give channels, but you also have to give a portion of your revenue to the community that you're working in, because you are using the public rights of way to make your money. So you need to pay back not only in channels, but also in some financial capacity. So this started happening in the 70s around the country, and Cambridge decided to wait and see how things would shake out so that we could get the best possible deal from the cable company that was going to come in here. So the city manager at the time, Bob Healy, appointed Joseph Sakey, who was the head of the Cambridge Public Libraries, to run this process. And after a lot of community meetings and interviews with lots of different cable companies that wanted to get into Cambridge, they settled on a cable company in 1985, I believe. And CCTV was established a little bit afterwards, but did not open until 1988.
And the idea behind CCTV was it was the provider, it was going to become the provider for those local cable access channels.
Right. Yeah, so there's public, educational, and governmental access, commonly called PEG in our industry. So Joe Sakey and those he was working with decided that we should have separate public, educational, and governmental access entities so that the government would not in any way interfere with the free speech enjoyed by the public on the public access channels, and things could be nicely separated. Now, in a lot of communities, they were combined in various combinations, PEs or PGs or EGs or whatever, you know, all of that. But we remain separated now, although there's been talk for a number of years about combining the entities in order to create some efficiencies in how services are delivered.
So describe those earliest days at CCTV. What was it like? I mean, how many staff were there? Where you were One Kendall Square? Were you just in some huge vacant space trying to figure out how this all works? I mean, you were basically creating it from new, as far as we can tell, right? I mean, this was all sort of.
I mean, I have to say that Erwin and his board really planned the facility itself. We had a beautiful studio. It was a professional studio, and it was thought that there would be a lot of opportunities for the creation of paying relationships with some of the incoming companies that were opening in Kendall Square at the time. So that was a revenue model that did not exist in the public access world very much at that time. It was, in fact, it was frowned upon to think about taking the community's equipment and using it to make money. But Erwin was kind of, he was a visionary in that he recognized that relying entirely on cable revenue was not really the good way to go. And it was important to diversify our funding. So we had beautiful facilities and state-of-the-art equipment, and it was a great spot. So there were three of us at the beginning. So Erwin, myself, and a technician. And I remember distinctly the first time we played a program on the cable, because we actually didn't have any furniture yet. And the video deck, it was a 3/4-inch video deck that we were using to play back the program, was sitting on the floor. And we had a camera also hooked up to it. And, you know, my feet were walking by on the camera, and then I hit play and the program went out to Cambridge. So it was that kind of hands-on.
And what was some of the early programs? I mean, where did you start in this whole endeavor? What was the first thing you thought, we ought to put that on the air?
Well, we started very early on with trying to create some production groups. And one of the first production groups was a women's production group that was co-coordinated by the Cambridge Women's Commission under Nancy Ryan and Mary Leno. And that was one of the most active production groups for the first few years. We not only did local programs on a monthly basis, but we also hosted the International Women's Day Video Festival, which I had co-hosted in Jamaica Plain at Boston Neighborhood Network prior to coming to CCTV. So that was great. We went live via satellite from Kendall Square at a time when the technology was really like, wow, you know, this was not usually in the hands of regular folks. So it was pretty exciting.
That's amazing. And then, okay, so now we're going to move up through the years, and you're giving the history lesson continues, but now you've become the executive director, and you're a woman who's just got energy and you've got lots of ideas, and let's make this roll. Where did you decide, or how did you figure out where you wanted to go with CCTV and what you thought was the appropriate role for the station and how people would get involved? What happened when you became executive director?
Well, the first initiative was to get out of Kendall Square.
Oh, really? And why? Why?
Because people weren't there. That's not where the people were. And we wanted to get it into Central Square where the people are. And it was, it's an intersection of really important constituencies of CCTV in Central Square. So we were very fortunate to find a space, and we built it out, and we moved in 1993, I believe. I'm getting confused now. Maybe it was a little later than that, but soon thereafter.
Into that location across from the field, and is
Correct.
that where you were? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And then what did you do with the station? How did you address the many challenges of running a local cable TV station? Or how did you think about it? What was your?
Yeah, I thought about it more as opportunities. Certainly there were challenges, but there were a lot of opportunities. And one of the things that was a sort of a classic tenet of public access at the time was first come, first serve. And a lot of us recognize that first come, first serve is actually fairly discriminatory, because there are people who don't think this is for them. They maybe are not native English speakers. They maybe are technophobic and think, I couldn't possibly create a program, I couldn't possibly use a video camera. And so we were much more proactive about it. So we sought out communities that we thought might find those barriers to be the case, and we actively tried to get them into CCTV.
And how did you do that? I mean, that appears in many things in public life and all. It's hard sometimes to reach people and say, no, you can participate too. How did you guys go about? How did you all go about doing that?
I think it helped to be. We were truly embedded in the community. In that we were, as I said, right there in Central Square. I live a few blocks away from the station. You start joining boards and start getting to know people and start getting to know different organizations. And the best way to go is through organizations that are serving the constituencies that you're looking to reach, because they best know how to do so and can also sort of vouch for us as for real, that we're seriously committed to what we're saying we're wanting to do.
Yeah. So yeah, no, go ahead.
Start offering classes in Spanish, and we reached out to the senior center, and just trying to tap into different constituencies in Cambridge.
And how successful would you rate those efforts?
Why don't you tell me, Sam?
To me, I'm a believer. So you don't really have to convince me very hard. To me, CCTV is one of those sort of magical things. And we'll get to this a little bit further on. I want to get a little more history under the belt, but it's one of those very important things for a local community, and not just for the community itself, but also for how it functions, its government, its ability to represent itself and express its ideas, to address challenging topics. It is, lo and behold, as the First Amendment noted many, many years ago, a crucial part of a democracy. And you all play that role incredibly well. And interestingly, or fascinatingly, as technology has changed and evolved, and ever more so over the last decade and plus, the old newspaper route that used to be the core bedrock of all communication is now transferred to a large degree, I believe, to video, to audio. And so you're right there, but you're also small d democratic. You're open to everybody. You want people to walk through the front door. So to me, I'm a true believer, but maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe I should. You always worry about the true believers. Yeah. But you've done this amazing work. I know you've been recognized by lots. I believe that CCTV has been recognized by lots of boards and commissions and awards, I think, and just saying the fabulous work that you do. Where do you think CCTV is right now? I mean, we've been living through this crazy time, and unplanned is sort of a byproduct of COVID. And And by the way, let me note, Unplanned does show on CCTV, so look for it there.
Yep.
But where do you think CCTV is right now, given everything that's going on in the world and the role that your place plays in all of that?
Sure. Well, going back a little bit more
Yeah.
to, we talked about the free speech aspect and the importance of people telling their stories to each other. I think that helps to strengthen the fabric of a community, hearing other people's stories, and that humanizes other people and lets you in on their lived experience. Moving from that at a time when as I said, people didn't have access to the equipment, to a time when people do have access to the equipment, for the most part, what is our role at that point? We, over the years, we did morph into exploring all the different technologies as the computer and internet came online, and people didn't have access to those tools, and we started to provide those. But there came a time when everybody had a cell phone in their pocket, and therefore everybody had a television studio in their pocket. So what is the role of a place like CCTV in that circumstance? And so we had to look at that, especially over the past 10 years, in a lot of strategic planning sessions, thinking about the role of being an actual community center where people come and engage with each other, which, you could argue that everybody having technology of their own is very isolating. And then we also look at how the distribution models are critical, because, you can, as you know, Sam, so you're creating this program and it's like, yeah, you can put it on the internet, but you still have to attract an audience. And so we try to help that way by aggregating local content in a place where people will come to see it, expecting to see the local content. You also mentioned the news issue, which is that we're local news agencies and newspapers and everything local is, has disappeared over the years. And now coming to today, we're at the point with this pandemic and the quarantining that's been going on, that people are craving local information. How is this pandemic affecting me and my community right now, right here? Unfortunately, it's been an opportunity for the importance of community media to rise to the top again, because we were able to really pivot and really delve into the kinds of information and stories that people really wanted to hear, which was what was going on in their own community and in their own house in a lot of cases. So that's the role we're at right now. We've been able to offer our classes online and help people with tutorials to learn how to produce using the equipment that they have.
I do. Your point about everybody becomes a television producer in a way with a cell phone. Honestly, with a cell phone and a laptop, you can do a lot of this stuff. But then how do you position yourselves in that picture is, of course, fascinating. And in my own experience, and I'll speak for myself here, you've done a very good job, because you really have opened your doors to people who have an interest or might have an interest. And you've said, this is how you could use this equipment. This is how you could think about it. And to me, that's been wonderful. How would you, as we get towards our close, we only have a certain number of minutes on the show, and I know you're a busy woman, you've got a lot going on, but how would you assess, given those earliest days and your activist spirit and the ways in which you wanted to change the world as a young woman out on the front lines, the promise of CCTV, of local media, of community television as a vehicle to do that, what's your assessment of that over these years? You've had you now have a perspective that you can look back on and say, well, we did this well, maybe we didn't do that quite as well as we wanted to. What's your thought? What are your thoughts?
I think we've done pretty well. I think that CCTV is a nationally recognized community media center. I think that people in Cambridge who do know us have a great deal of respect for us. I think one of the problems we've had is making sure that everybody knows who we are and what we do, because we do so many different things and we reach so many different audiences, but people sometimes don't, oh, I didn't know you had classes. I knew that you had cable television channels, but I didn't know you did this or did that. So, I think promotion has been hard for us in a lot of ways. And that's because we're in the shadow of the Boston media market, where there's so much competition for for people's time and eyeballs, as they say in the industry. So that remains a challenge, but I think that we have endeared ourselves and made ourselves, I don't want to say indispensable, but certainly critically important to, as I said, the fabric of the community and its ability to communicate within itself and bring people together.
And I just, as a closing question, it's a related question, but from a slightly different angle. You are one of the pieces of fabric that knit us together. You've lived in Cambridge for many years. What's your assessment of this city? You've seen it change over time. It's a very different city than it was presumably in the 70s, and 50 years before that, and 50 years from now. What's your assessment of this city? It works hard at trying to do things right, but there's always issues. There's always questions. So
yeah, I mean, we're unfortunately, in a lot of ways, we're a very attractive place to live for people. So we've been essentially driving out or not allowing to stay here people who are of lesser financial means. And that has been a super, super huge loss. And that's not going to change. This place is, it's a wonderful place to live, but the quality of that life has changed over time as we see the loss of longtime families and kids who can't afford to live here anymore. So I'm sorry about that. And I know, in another lifetime, I might have been an urban planner because I really think that it's a fascinating thing to think about. And looking at, smart cities and how one makes a smart city and the conflict that sometimes brings with longtime residents who just want things to be the way they've always been, and not make any changes. We're at that very tense point, I think, in Cambridge. And I think we need some really visionary leadership to bring us out of that to the other side.
So to close out, you're part of a wonderful organization. People may see this on CCTV, this conversation, but where would people go to learn more about CCTV? Where should they go? A website, an address? Where do they find out more?
Well, right now, unfortunately, we're dark over there at 438 Mass Ave in Central Square, but you can go to cctvcambridge.org, and there are all kinds of tutorials to take advantage of and look at media that people are creating and classes to take. And you can also go to Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV to see a lot of our work. So we're out there on channels 98. I'm sorry, I don't even remember our channels, 8, 9, and 96.
Well, Susan, you're a hero to many of us in the Cambridge community. You've been a stalwart leader and a force for change and for the good in this community. And your work is much loved and appreciated. And it's great you're getting back to photography, because that's another recent passion of mine. It's a joy. So
great.
Thank you for joining us on Unplanned.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Appreciate it.